Hey guys, if you're watching this, it should be Tuesday, and obviously this will be updated. But we're actually going to get into the early European settlements. So this is based on our reading that we would have had on Friday. Yesterday on Monday, we did just do current events and broke convention. I did take a half day, and there was also class meetings all day. So I just wanted to make sure all my classes were on the same page. So sorry about that yesterday, but it's always good to get current events. Like I used to do it regularly. Every Friday was like current events day. Um, some kids liked it, some kids didn't, but I listened to student feedback at the end. They said, some people are like, could we just do it here and there instead of every week? And I said, all right, I'll listen to you guys. So anyway, we're going to get into it. The first Europeans here. So we had people here before, if you remember a long, long time ago when we had our introduction to natives, when we were just looking at the first Americans and people coming over, all the different complex groups and all the other Europeans and people from Africa, from Asia, from Europe, everywhere getting there. It definitely told a more complicated story. It's not one that we're used to typically, and there's even more to the story than what I've shared with you. So if you want to go back and revisit any of that, that's fine and that's awesome. But we're going to look at some of the more mainstream Europeans coming in, making settlements all along the coast, and how it works for them and the natives and everything. So we're getting closer and closer to setting up Pennsylvania with William Penn coming. We're almost there. That's your next reading. To start, as we always do, let's look at the bell ringer. So for this, I pulled this from an old book, a book that we're going to take a look at then in a second. But I just want you to analyze this picture for a while, and I want you to try to tell me some of the things you see. So right now I'm going to give you, let's say, 35 seconds exactly. Look at the picture, tell me what you think, because this is supposed to be Pennsylvania as we know it. Okay, ready, set, go. You're on the clock. As you're looking, I'll talk a little bit. This is a 1702 engraving from a Swedish artist. Just looking at a friendly exchange between local Indians and traders in New Sweden along the Delaware, all the pointy parts of Pennsylvania. This picture comes from the descriptions written by the one that was already there, like his grandfather. So this wasn't a first account, but written from an account, or I guess drawn to try to depict it. And that happens with a lot of images we have, like throughout our history and our textbooks. Some of our mythical heroes that we have in early history are not actually based that much on historical fact, but sometimes from what grandkids or great grandkids said and made up. If we're looking at Betsy Ross, Molly Pitcher, and so on. We can get into that later, but we get things wrong sometimes. So, did you look at it? Did you notice some things weird? Since this is not actually coming from a first-hand account, we can notice a couple things. I'll point it out since you're not going to answer that in comments. But one thing, palm trees. Yeah, probably not, right? Not in Pennsylvania. We do get, looks like maybe a longhouse, maybe a teepee, a wigwam. But there probably would have had more fortified cities, probably more longhouses. We can see over here, we see some tribal warfare, which, yeah, right. Iroquois Algonquin fighting. Some of the Iroquois killing other Iroquois, since that's just the language, that's the way we have it. I believe this is burying the dead, which they did do. Remember, they would basically set up a coffin. There'd be bark. They'd lay them on top and make like a small frame and put bark on top of that. It does show them all as fully nude, which wasn't always the case. They would wear clothes depending on the weather. It was mostly like the kids that ran around more so naked. What else do we notice in here? I think it shows children learning. Maybe that's an elder. It's hard for me to even see and speculate. Looks like they have friendly relations trading, which was definitely true. Furs, tobacco. But I just wanted you to take a look at that because I always think it's important to look at photos. And we'll look at a couple more. So for your actual bell ringer, what you can do in comments, later we will get to more images based on this book that I pulled it from. And I'd like you to visit the link, delawaretribe.org, and it's Indians of New Sweden. If you put that in a quick Google search, if you want to type it like this exactly, you can find a book. And in the book, it has a description of New Zealand. And it's Pennsylvania in America, and it just gives a bunch of different lines and even images throughout, if I can find some quick, that are super interesting, and these serve as like primary documents, sort of, because it's not like a first-hand account per se, but it's written from the grandchild writing about the first-hand account. So in bell ringer comments, I want you to take a look, just skim through it. I don't care if you just randomly land on one page. If you could just read one page and then basically tell me about what you read. So I'm pretty much asking, out of the 173 pages, and most of the bottom is just footnotes. So let's say like 150 pages. Can you just read one page and then just say, hey, I read this on page 47 that, I'll give you an example. Sorry, I'm all over the place, guys. I'm a mess. So let's say page 57 was about the natives trading furs for weapons. And I thought it was interesting that the two tribes were fighting and trading with Europeans. I don't know. Whatever you guys, I just basically want you to summarize it. So tell me what you find, and every answer in the bell ringer should be different than each other's, okay? Just go to a random page and tell me what the page is about, and that'll give us a better picture of the story. So that is your true bell ringer outside of just looking at this image. So, all right, almost 8 minutes in. Let's keep going. For today and tomorrow, two-parter, as always, you know it. We're going to discuss the early European settlements in the Americas and also describe the initial British settlements in America, since we've had so many other groups. And what are those groups? Well, let's look at it. One are the Swedes, Swedish, from Sweden. Next one are the Dutch from the Netherlands, called Holland. This is the tougher one for most kids to remember, since it's not like Dutchland. It'd be Holland or the Netherlands. So the Dutch, the Swedes, and then also the British, the English, as you guys know it, the easy one to remember, because that's kind of how we trace our history, at least for the majority of people, and what mostly the textbook says. So the Swedes, they would be here first in the areas of Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and they would call this land New Sweden. The Dutch, to contrast with that, they would create New Netherlands. All these groups are so great with names, right? They're great with names. They would land in New Jersey, Connecticut, New York area. And then the British, they would come late in the game to create Jamestown, because Roanoke failed, if you know that, and we'll talk about that more so tomorrow. But in Virginia, and then New England, so like Plymouth. Again, great at naming things. New this, new that, new that. Very, very original. I did include these maps because kids often aren't that great. Maybe it's social studies in general, or they're talking history, civics, economics, geography. We don't know our geography very well. So I did want to just give you a map so that you can better conceptualize the areas that we're talking about. Now, when we talk about all of these, it's not all that obvious who's going to take control of the Americas. We have all these different European superpowers that have been fighting each other for like hundreds of years, guys, like slaughtering each other, very gruesome stuff constantly. constantly fighting for power, for clout, for dominance. It's long history. Holy smokes! So it's not all that obvious who's going to take control of the Americas, who's going to win out. Okay, these are like major powers, and it wasn't like guaranteed that Britain would be that guy to take over. Um, Especially not at first. They were late to the game, and their colonies were kind of like failed experiments. At least Jamestown was very rough. Roanoke failed. Eventually, New England. That's the one that most people think is like the first. It wasn't the first, but it was one of the better ones. That's probably why we point to it to have pride in it, because we kind of want to ignore all the blemish stories. But just from that example, you can see very early on that it wasn't like guaranteed at all. It's easy for us to think about life as it is and history as it is, but 1,000 things could have went wrong, and we could not have ended up at this point. In fact, it's a miracle that we are where we are today, right now, at this point in history. So, now while all these European superpowers, not even in North America alone, like if we're talking the Atlantic coast, like Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, South America, and so on, well, they're all laying claim to this land. They're all fighting over this land. Sometimes it's more peaceful with some of the natives, the indigenous people there, and sometimes not. Well, who owns it? Is this even a question we should ask? Like, who cares? All these other kings and noblemen, maybe God's telling them, no, this land 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 miles away. No, it's ours. We lay claim to it. But it's something we should definitely consider when we're even looking at this, because this is nations expanding. This is colonialism. It's imperialism. It's a same thing if you get the Iroquois League doing it all across the nations. It's them just taking other people's stuff. Is that okay? Is it not okay? Is it a defense to just say, well, everybody's doing it, might as well be us? I would say that's maybe not a great defense, but this stuff leads to problems. You can say sometimes it leads to progress. Maybe combining cultures leads to, I don't know, a different idea, a breakthrough in science, something like that. But it's definitely a problem, and it creates problems throughout our history too, and we have to be honest about that. Now, let me go in a little bit more detail, and I'll just change the slide so you like pay attention a little bit. So, the Swedes first. They're taking 2 ships with traders, businessmen. They're landing in the Delaware, and they stayed along the Delaware River, so all the pointy parts, as you guys know. And I think we looked at an image of that too. They've got pretty good relations with each other and some of the other Europeans. They have some Dutch and Germans and Irish that coexisted with them. Decent relations with the natives too, like the Delaware or the Susquehannocks. Their guy in charge, Johann Prince, the natives called him Big Belly for obvious reasons. He was 6 foot, maybe over 300 to 400 pounds. He was the guy in charge. We're also going to watch a video on this. You should have read this as well. They coexisted, like I said, with the natives and the Dutch. Things were like fine. Eventually, the Swedes even helped the Susquehannocks against the English in a war. A lot of their backgrounds, the people there, they might have been craftsmen, farmers, businessmen, even priests. And they basically, their claim to fame was building cabins that were useful. And these are structures that we would adopt as our own culture. This is where we get it from. When the Swedes would be taken over by the Dutch and even the English later, they were treated good. Some would go back to Europe, some would be sent back to Europe, but most of them just went on with their lives and it was fine. Now the Dutch in New Netherlands, they were a force to be reckoned with, at least with trade. They may not have had like the best military or the most or like the best navy, but they were a superpower in trade. They had some of the lowest shipping rates, and they also allowed religious tolerance, which was big back then, especially with what you guys probably know and the history that you know, with persecution, murder, with people that even celebrate the same God, they read the same books. They have the same day of worship, but they just do it slightly different. It's kind of outrageous. This is also a time when we have like the Inquisition and even killing in the Americas by some of the Europeans. Again, like Christians killing other Christians because they do it different. So this is a huge deal and definitely worth noting. That's why I'm telling you. Religious freedom back then is a huge thing. It's not insignificant. Now their culture, and I think you'll like this because it's where Wall Street is, and it's where it gets its name. It's all about money. It's all about productivity. They're very big on this. Another quick example to kind of show you a parallel of today. If you look at U.S. culture, for instance, like you take like a day off, like that is frowned upon. No way. Like we work, we work, we work. Even if you're not blue collar, a lot of our culture has that blue collar attitude. You go to work, you work hard, you go in early, you stay late, no vacations. Why would you want to do that? Like you got to work. Um, Whereas in other places, other cultures, other countries, you get regular vacations, every other month, whatever. And their ideology, and it's actually backed up by research, that you can better take care of yourself and it actually makes you a better employee. But we don't necessarily see it that way. We're like always on the go, drive through this, drive through that. We don't sit down for anything because we got to go work. That's awesome. Um, Kind of like the same attitude that the Dutch have. Now, they are setting up in this area. Swedes are setting up down there. There's some overlap and they do run into each other. Again, they're kind of living somewhat peacefully together, but something that you guys need to pay attention to is what we call the wedge. This is getting bigger and bigger. This is getting bigger and bigger. And now these two are caught in between two English colonies. So we can kind of already foreshadow what is going to happen, and you guys, dun, 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 you guys know what's going to happen. Spoiler alert. So just something to be mindful of there. Now, the Dutch, they also had a good sized population, kind of like the English. It's definitely bigger than the Swedes. They worked well with the natives. They had a good trade relationship for sure, and they basically saw them as business partners. They could buy and sell and trade other things, mostly furs. And this is where what would happen in Manhattan, like Wall Street. Do you know why it has that name? Well, that is where they had a wall. There you go. We solved the Da Vinci Code. Wall Street has its name from the Dutch, who basically had a wall there, like as in like a fortress. So now, other than trading, the Dutch did have a lot of settlers. They had some farmers. The towns were big trading centers, of course, but it was a little bit different than some other cultures, such as the English. If you remember, natives here at this time, women had a lot more power, more roles in government, could elect leaders, pick when harvests are, they had more say in war, and sometimes they could even be leaders. This is a lot different than some other cultures and countries. The Netherlands, they would have a lot more freedom for women and even free blacks. They could hold land, they could own their businesses, they could work. And once the English take over, this goes away for women. Their rights get taken away, and even black rights would get taken away. But not at first, and I'll talk more about that tomorrow with Jamestown, because when we look at Virginia slavery to start, or even you could say racism in the colonies, it's a lot different. And to be a black man in Virginia in the early 1600s was a lot different than, let's say, 1660s, 1670s, 1680s. That's kind of when we take the shift, start taking away rights, start dehumanizing blacks, and it's different. I'll talk more about that tomorrow, though. Now, the English, late in the game, these are the last people to set up their colonies in North America, and they're coming in droves. To live in England at that time, especially some of the bigger cities, they are kind of how you picture cities now, and then they're messy, giant populations, crime, poverty, the poor. They're hungry. it doesn't have a good rep now, and cities, I'm not sure when cities ever have had a good rep, but they're coming in absolute droves for many different reasons. Whether you're trying to start anew, whether you're being forced to, there was some kidnapping hysteria in the early 1600s to try to set up the new colonies. Even so much so that they thought they were picking and selecting quote unquote breeders for brothels to try to create a larger population. If you don't know what some of those words are, okay, whatever. If you do, holy smokes, yeah. So there was some hysteria. We can look at primary documents of different, what do you call it? It's like a poster that they would hang up, or there were some novels written too at the time. Again, we go back to pop culture, writing about how people were being kidnapped, kids were being kidnapped and shipped off to the new world, because they're not going to have necessarily, let's say you're well established, you're an elite, you're this, you're that. Are you really going to take a chance? Like, you don't even know what's over there. You have no clue. And it doesn't really work out for Roanoke, and it doesn't work out great for Jamestown. So, England wasn't that great. They, a lot of people came for a lot of different reasons, but they weren't always the best reasons. So, they're starting anew, and didn't work out as great as you might think. Some were religious outcasts, some wanted to come for glory, changes, some were poor, sometimes criminals would be sent over as servants. That happened often, and life expectancy was very low coming, as in like you might have a 50-50 chance of dying in the first 2 years. So this contrasts sharply with the Swedes and the Dutch. And the English also had different relations with the natives. For instance, with the giant populations they're sending, many times it didn't really work out for them to have relationships with the natives or work together as they would with the Swedes and the Dutch. Many times it's just, hey, get out of my way, we're doing our own thing, we're going to set it up. So it was definitely different for them. Now I could keep going, but I'm not gonna. Thanks for bearing with me through that time. Tomorrow when we come back, we'll look at the English colonies more so. And we'll look at some of the contributions from the Dutch and the Swedes. Other than that, we'll talk about the English colonies and how it worked out for them. Because it's not what Charlie Brown portrays. So it's a lot more complicated and ugly. But alright guys, thanks again. Happy Tuesday. It is a great day to learn. Thanks for listening to me blab on. Alright, have a good one guys. Remember to comment your reading from the DelawareTribe.org. Okay, take that time. That is your job and your homework. Thanks guys. Bye.